Hello and welcome. This is a Click the Lightwell guide to Warlord Zon'ozz on the PTR at the moment, 10-man version. This boss is currently bugged or overtuned one way or the other. We believe he's currently using some extra mechanics that he's not supposed to be using, specifically the Eye of Gorath in the Shadow phase. That he's not supposed to be using in normal mode, so this fight is not a true representation of how the fight should be in normal on live. For this reason we used an extra healer, which you shouldn't really have to use on live, but we believe is currently the only way to do this with balanced gear on the PTR. We had one healer in 383 healing gear, we had two healers in 378 pre-made gear, and with that setup it was a bit too tricky for us to keep up with the healing throughout the fight. So we brought in an extra healer with, I think he had about 365 gear or thereabouts, and that was enough for us to beat it. This is because the boss currently doesn't have an enraged timer that we were able to find, and so we were basically able to heal him to death. The fight focuses around an ability called Void of the Unmaking, an orb which travels around the room, and you have to prevent it from reaching the wall. If it reaches the walls of the room at any point, then you die. You can bounce the Void of Unmaking off other players. When the Void collides with a player, it will diffuse, and that will inflict 180,000 shadow damage evenly between nearby players. Now we think that this is approximately a 10-yard radius around the player that's hit, but that might not be entirely accurate. The Void will increase in the damage that it inflicts, depending on how many times you bounce it, by 20% according to the current encounter journal per diffusion. So basically by the time that you've bounced it 5 times it will be inflicting twice as much damage as normal. That's 20% each time. The other key mechanic is that he will increase his damage on the tank. That will increase both his physical damage done by 10% and his attack speed by 10%, so essentially 20% damage increase on the tank every time he gains a stack of focused anger. You can remove the boss's stacks of focused anger by allowing the Void of the Unmaking to hit the boss rather than a player. So this is essentially a reset mechanic that you have to use throughout the fight. Right, now our strategy revolves around facing the boss in different directions at different times of the fight. He always summons the orb directly in front of him, and he also does a frontal AoE nuke and health leech in a 30-degree cone in front of him as well. So there are times when you want to face him towards the raid so that your raid can catch the orb, and there are times when you don't want to face him towards the raid because it will restore him to full health. We split the raid into two groups. We have a melee group and we have a ranged group, and how you set that out is going to depend on how many healers you use and the makeup of your raid setup. You will only need one tank for this fight. As I said before, we used 4 healers for this, so we had 1 tank, 4 healers and 5 DPS. Now as you can see in our raid setup here, we've got 2 melee DPS, we've got 1 warrior and 1 DK. That allows us to have 1 tank, 2 melee DPS and 2 healers in the melee group, plus 1 healer and the rest of the ranged DPS in the ranged group, therefore making 5 people in each stack. The reason for that is that you want to spread the damage as evenly as possible between different players when the orb impacts the group and spreads its damage. Now at the start of the fight you want to face the boss towards everybody in the raid. Now you can do that by using the colour markers that we place on the floor. You can see in our raid group here we've got a yellow marker at the edge of the pool that he's standing in. That's where our ranged group stands all the way through the fight. They never move from there apart from when they stack up. And if we face it towards that and stand the melee DPS round behind him for some extra DPS, then the orb will be summoned between the boss and the ranged group, and it will travel out from the boss, and the first group that it will hit will be the ranged group. So the ranged group catch the orb and they send it back towards the boss because it bounces directly away from them. At this point, as soon as the orb has been summoned, we move our melee group round in between the boss and the ranged group. The tank will turn the boss at this point, so the boss is facing approximately 90 degrees off to one side. You can see that in our video. That's our red marker. So the melee group is now in between the boss and the ranged group, and the tank is facing the boss away, so that whenever the boss uses his frontal nuke, it just hits the tank, doesn't hit anyone else. And with a little bit of adjustment left and right, the ranged group and the melee group are both able to just ping pong the orb back and forth in between them until such a point where we want it to hit the boss. Now we did this by having the orb hit the ranged group 3 times and the melee group twice. So from the beginning of the phase, the orb will hit the ranged group, then the melee group, then the ranged group, then the melee group, then the ranged group, for a total of 5 impacts. Okay, so that's going to increase the damage from the void dispersions each time by 20%, meaning that by the time that it's impacted 5 times, the damage has doubled. This is the point where the healers are on the edge of keeping people alive, and after this we allow it to hit the boss. To make sure this happens, we make sure that the melee run round the back of the boss. They usually run round to the left to make sure they avoid being hit by any kind of nukes that are going out, and the tank will move across one way or the other, either towards the red marker or away from the red marker, to guide the boss into the orb. When the boss gets hit by the orb, he will run to where we've got the blue marker down. We all run to the blue marker as well, and we stack up an AoE heal. You will need healers to use cooldowns through this phase if the damage is anything like it currently is on the PTR. So you'll want to use 1 healer cooldown per shadow phase until the shadow phase ends. Once you have finished with the shadow phase, you need to move back to your original positions. Now for the melee, this is going to be where we have our purple marker set up, and for the range group again it's going to be the yellow marker. At the end of the shadow phase, the tank needs to face the boss towards the red marker, which, as I've said before, is perpendicular to the yellow marker. And this means that the boss will use his nuke facing away from the raid, so the raid does not give him his health back, and it doesn't kill us either. As soon as the nuke is used, you can turn the boss to face the yellow marker. That's turn the boss to face the ranged group in preparation for him spawning an orb again. So after the nuke, facing towards the ranged group, he'll spawn another orb, and you can reset the fight from there. There's not a great deal else to be said about the fight. It's a relatively straightforward fight. The only things that might give you trouble are directing the orbs, because sometimes they can bounce off people at a funny angle, and if your players are not quick to react to it bouncing at a weird angle, then the one person who is awake might catch the orb and have no one else around him to soak the damage with, which can cause wipes. Overall though, it's quite a straightforward fight, and I shouldn't really need to say much more else, so if I just leave it there and you can watch the rest of the video. Thanks for watching, cheers, bye.